the future of antidepressants and the future of depression. Whether you are engaged in formal research involving scientific journal articles, or you're just informally gathering anecdotes from the people you happen to know and care about in your own life, what you're going to find is the same rationalization, the same sort of strange excuse being offered again and again and again. 1, this is something real. 2, this is biologically real. 3, in some strange way, it's the same as having diabetes. How can it be? I mean, when you look back at Shakespeare, when you look through, century by century, the allegories we have used to express human sorrow, human sadness, human misery, and in some sense, depression. How could it be that in our age, in our era, in our epoch, it's a blood sugar problem, diabetes, that's become the dominant paradigm for how we think about, how we understand depression. Oh yes, and its cure.
When we look at the narrative that has driven our care in the United States and elsewhere over the past 30 years, it centers on this chemical imbalance theory of mental disorders. So the theory is that, say, depression is due to too little serotonin in the brain, and that the drugs fix that serotonin, they restore it to a normal level, and therefore it's like insulin for diabetes. Now that is a metaphor. That is a story that tells of extraordinary progress. Think about it. You've identified the very molecule that causes depression or psychosis or, quote, ADHD, and you can fix it.
So I was clinically diagnosed by a psychiatrist in December 2016. I've been having this illness for 4 years, and according to my research is that there is no cure for clinical depression. So you can seek treatment and take medication. The medication will suppress the symptoms. You can go into a remission, but then it comes back again, and then you even take more medication. So the way to treat it is to keep taking the medication to treat an illness. It's just like if you have a kidney disease, you have to treat it with medication and injections, or you have cancer every day, you have to take your medication.
Oh, and by the way, as part of this story of progress, what happens do we learn about in the 80s, early 90s? We hear that these drugs fix chemical imbalances in the brain. So we hear that that depression is due to low serotonin. You take an SSRI at up serotonergic levels, and therefore it's like a treatment like for insulin for diabetes.
So mental illness is actually the same as any other illness. Clinically depressed means there is actually an injury in your brain, and there is a chemical imbalance in your brain.
So that's the story that we organized our care around, and you can find it was promoted by the American Psychiatric Association. And here's the amazing thing. It's not true.
There's really only one thing that diabetes has in common with depression, and that is that people believe that both justify taking prescription medication every day, possibly multiple times per day, for the rest of their lives. Diabetes has become the preferred example for something that is physically and biologically real, precisely because the question these people don't want you to ask is, oh, you're taking antidepressants? So, are they working? Are you cured yet? Are you better yet? And when are you going to stop taking those drugs? Because if you're never going to stop, then it starts to sound a whole lot like some kind of psychological dependency. Kristen Bell. When I was 18 years old, my mother said to me, if you start to feel like you are twisting things around you, and you start to feel like there is no sunlight around you, and you are paralyzed with fear, this is what it is, and here's how you can help yourself. And I've always had a really open and honest dialogue about that, especially with my mom, which I'm so grateful for. Because you have to be able to cope with it. I mean, I present that very cheery, bubbly person, but I also do a lot of work. I do a lot of introspective work, and I check in with myself when I need to exercise. And I got on a prescription when I was really young to help with my anxiety and depression. And I still take it to this day. And I have no shame in that, because my mom had said, if you start to feel this way, talk to your doctor, talk to a psychologist, and see how you want to help yourself. And if you do decide to go on a prescription to help yourself, understand that the world wants to shame you for that. But in the medical community, you would never deny a diabetic his insulin. Ever. But for some reason, when someone needs a serotonin inhibitor, they're immediately crazy or something. And I don't know. It's a very interesting double standard that I often don't have the ability to talk about, but I certainly feel no shame about. It's interesting that these conversations tend to begin and end with statements about reality, about what's truly real. The claim being made again and again that depression isn't just a subjective experience of sorrow or sadness. No, no, no. This is something real. As opposed to having a discussion about whether or not the treatment works, whether or not the therapy is effective, whether or not it gets results, whether or not there's a known cure. Oh no, to some extent, on some level, everyone's aware that our skepticism is not primarily directed towards the cure. It's directed towards the mere existence of the condition itself. And what is our gold standard for the experience of something being truly real? It's the blood test you can take when you're suffering from diabetes. Isn't it strange that this allegory is used again and again for a population of millions of people taking psychiatric drugs for alleged psychiatric disorders who can never do this same simple thing themselves? Exactly what they're lacking is a blood test. Exactly what they're lacking is a litmus test, if you like. Exactly what they're lacking is any way to prove to you, to prove the world, or to prove to themselves that their problem is something real. Now, I am not of the opinion that subjective experiences, emotions, and feelings are unreal. No, 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 no. And sometimes, even within the medical sciences, we have to talk about feelings, emotions, subjective experiences as medically real symptoms. Just think about the process of quitting smoking, overcoming nicotine addiction. All right. There are really severe symptoms. There are measurable symptoms. There are real symptoms that you suffer from when you quit smoking. But you know what? Most of them are psychological. Most of them can't be demonstrated by taking a drop of blood from your fingertip. Oh, the reason why you're acting nervous, or the reason why you're depressed, or the reason why you're so frustrated driving your car, sitting in traffic, is because you're going through nicotine withdrawal. No, it's not quite that real. I once read an autobiographical account from a man who was taken hostage. He was taken hostage by old-fashioned, armed, communist terrorists in the jungle. And he was scared for his life. He woke up afraid. He fell asleep afraid, living in that terrorist camp every day until he was rescued. He had been a chain smoker, and he managed to quit smoking without ever experiencing any of those psychological symptoms. He quit smoking without even noticing that he was going through the process of withdrawal. If you have a condition as simple as the common cold, you can't do that. You can't overlook and you can't overcome the symptoms of just needing to cough because you happen to have been taken hostage. If you have diabetes, your blood test, when you prick your finger and draw that drop of blood, it's going to be the same whether you've been taken hostage by terrorists or not. But if you can be honest with yourself right now, think about your own worst experience of depression, sorrow, human misery. Think about the darkest, saddest time in your own life. And then think about how much your attitude would have changed. Think about the extent to which you would have been shaken out of it, or the extent to which you just would not have noticed those symptoms, those feelings, if you had been the one taken hostage by terrorists if you were waking up and falling asleep every day, alert and afraid for your life. That's what's real. What's real are the problems you have and you can't change and you can't ignore, even if you're literally taken hostage by terrorists.
Another analogy is you ask somebody in a wheelchair, come on, get out of your wheelchair and walk. See, they are in a wheelchair because they can't walk. So same thing for mental illness, you see, you can't work and you can't function because you have a brain injury and a chemical imbalance.
If you look at, say, for example, the low serotonin theory of depression, that depression is due to absence of normal activity of this chemical messenger, that actually was sort of falling out of, that was a hypothesis raised in 1965. It began to be investigated in the 1970s, and even in the 1970s, researchers weren't finding it to be so. They weren't finding that people with depression had low serotonin. And as early as 1984, the NIMH said, listen, there's no sign that there's a lesion in the serotonergic system that's a primary cause of depression. In 1998, the American Psychiatric Association's own textbooks sort of made fun of this hypothesis. What they said is it came out of understanding how the drugs act on the brain. They up serotonergic levels. And so we hypothesized that people with depression had low serotonin, but we didn't find it to be true.
So in 1987, we as a people in the United States spent about $800 million on psychiatric drugs. We're now spending about $40 billion a year on psychiatric drugs, 50-fold increase. You know what percentage of Americans of all ages now take a psychiatric drug on a daily basis? Any guess? 20%. So 1 in 5. That tells you how prevalent these become. We of course have children. I think it's the latest data I saw on children. About 13%. 13% have been diagnosed. It's about 10% now on a drug every day. That's from 6 to 17.
As I've mentioned in my earlier video, currently I'm taking 150 mg of Effexor in the morning, 2 tablets of Remeron, half a tablet of olanzapine, which is 2.5 mg, 2 mg of clonazepam, which is a sleeping pill. I'm maintaining that 4 medication, and my psychiatrist did try to wean me off the olanzapine, but every time I try to wean off, a few days time I feel like crap, and he asked me to try to reduce my clonazepam to 1 mg, and I also had trouble sleeping and staying asleep throughout the night if I cut down the 1 mg, and then the next day again I feel like crap. So yesterday we had sort of like a Chinese New Year reunion dinner. My wife and my sister-in-law initiated this dinner to have it before the Chinese New Year is over. Next to me is my brother who's 5 years older than me, my son Evan. Next to Evan is Noel, my eldest son, who is 21 now, and both of them are actually in college. So all in all, it was a good dinner, but I heard something when I was talking, and Jason, you have a good wife, you have a good 2 sons, and you have a good house, and you know you will get better, you'll be happy. And then that's what a depression sufferer doesn't want to hear, because it's like I can will my depression away. It's like saying to someone that was diabetic, oh, you have a good family, good children, good spouse, so you must get better soon, you know. So it's the same thing, you see. You won't say that to someone who's having cancer or diabetic or kidney disease.
Oh, no. Now wait. We're here to talk about the future of antidepressants. We're here to talk about the future of depression, not just the past. Kristen Bell thinks she's an activist. Kristen Bell thinks she's helping people. Kristen Bell is encouraging each and every one of you to take your good-looking teenage daughter down to the psychiatrist and sign her up for antidepressants, sign her up for anti-anxiety medications, and for you to teach your own children that they should regard these drugs as equivalent to insulin, and that then they should feel positive. They should feel proud to take those drugs every day for the rest of their lives, to regard it as a perpetual dependency, a treatment that does not lead to any cure. There was a time when nobody would have thought of censoring her. As recently as 2016, none of us thought of the purpose of government censorship as being ensuring the accuracy of medical advice on the internet. And we've seen a whole lot of crazy health fads come and go. We've seen all kinds of people peddling cures and weight loss programs that really could kill people, and some of them really did. And the governments of the Western democratic world stood far back and said, hey, freedom of speech, that's none of our concern. That's none of our business. And you know, just in the last few years, things have changed. Just in the last few years, every single one of us has experienced a level of censorship that we never imagined possible as recently as 2016. If you're a YouTuber, you know what it is to have your YouTube videos deleted because you dared to say something contrary to the government's message. And the government's message was always changing over the last 2 years, right? You said something that somehow challenged the propaganda message of the week as to what medical science is supposed to be and how we're all supposed to follow its dictates in our own personal and private lives. Many of you will have known what it's like to be threatened with having your Twitter account deleted or your Instagram shut down. And maybe sometimes it's just because you made a joke or because you were talking about a totally unrelated topic and you happen to have the wrong keywords in the message. I remember what YouTube was like in 2016, and I look at it today and I look at all the strange pauses and gaps where people don't want to say the wrong word. Well, that's the level of censorship we've gotten used to in the year 2022. And why? To save lives. The justification is that this censorship will save lives. If we were to silence, if we were to censor this beautiful, world-famous actress, do you really think it wouldn't save lives?
And here's the betrayal at the heart of this. Even as science was telling us that it wasn't true, that American Psychiatric Association, together with the pharmaceutical industries, were telling us that's what they had found. That's the betrayal. And there's even an extra kicker here. They found, for example, that people with a depression didn't have low serotonin before they went on the drug, okay? Now you give them a drug that ups serotonergic activity. What does the brain do? Well, it tries to maintain a homeostatic equilibrium, its normal functioning. So it actually decreases its serotonergic activity, the physiology of its serotonergic system. So here's the irony of science into the low serotonin, the investigation of low serotonin theory of depression. They hypothesized that people with depression had low serotonin. They didn't find it to be so before you went on the drug, and then they found that the drugs induced the very pathology hypothesized to cause depression in the first place.
I don't have to think about cutting down. I just keep taking, and at least every day I can function and I can shoot videos like this, But there are also side effects of taking the medication. Okay, firstly, you feel hot flushes. Secondly, you feel the need to close your eyes all the time because of the headaches. You see, the headaches attack your eyes, and also you keep yawning non-stop, and you feel the need to eat all the time to distract the restlessness. So I put on weight, and also another side effect is constipation. So the poo is stuck in wherever in my body. So I keep farting, and it's not very nice when you're around people. And I'm having bad nightmares every night. So that's why taking medication also have its side effects. And the psychiatrist always wants you to try to wind down the medication. My situation is not really improving.
And now let's go back to why would you see a rising disability rates? Well, one of the things here is instead of the drugs being medications that fix a pathology, what we've really learned is they create abnormalities in neurotransmitter function. And as soon as you understand that science, it becomes fairly easy to understand why, particularly over the long term, these drugs are not going to improve functioning. they're more likely to impair functioning.
So, to show you that I'm not kidding you, here is a screenshot of my OKU card. I actually applied for an OKU and it was successful. So, the OKU, as you can see, that it is a mental illness. Depression, it is a mental illness and it's not something that is just made up. It is an illness just like if you have cancer or kidney or pancreas or dementia. Yes, it is an illness. So that is the proof. It's biological, meaning there's a chemical imbalance in the brain. And the brain is the most complex organ in your whole body.
Conventional narrative is this, that we've made this great progress. This is the narrative told by psychiatry, that we've made great progress in understanding the biology of mental disorders. We've discovered that they are illnesses, they have a biological pathology. And we're getting new and better drugs that sort of fix, that are antidotes to those disorders. We have this narrative that tells of great scientific progress. We have more people getting treated. But then why is the burden of mental illness going up in society after society as measured by the number of people on disability due to psychiatric disorders? And in the United States, for example, we had 1.25 million people on disability, adults. In other words, they were receiving a government check because they couldn't function in society. In 1987, that's the year that Prozac is approved for marketing. Today we have about 5 million people on disability. Why? Why do you see this fourfold increase if we're getting more people treated and with better and better medications?
Is that disability for mental illness?
Yes. So this is people. Yeah, so this is people. When we talk about the disability statistics, this is people declared eligible for disability to receive a Social Security payment because of a mental disorder.
During this time of second-generation drugs, we're seeing this rising disability numbers. By the way, if you follow those kids who get on disability as children, when they hit age 18, it seems about 2/3 go on to adult disability right away. So what you see is a new career path that has opened up in our society, where you get diagnosed and said to be mentally ill early on, and that becomes sort of your lot in life.
So what you see in every country that has adopted this model of care and adopted widespread use of psychiatric medications, you see increased mental problems, increased psychiatric problems among the children, and you see the same in adults. So normally when you see more people diagnosed for a problem and more people treated for the problem, the hope is, of course, the burden of that problem will go down in a society. It's exactly the reverse here. And you see this in every country that has adopted this paradigm of care. You see an increase in the number of people who can't work. You see an increase in the sign that their children are sort of psychiatrically disturbed. You see an increase in problems among college-age kids. So if it were a good thing, we would see the problems of psychiatric distress lessening in society, right, among those who are using the drugs. It's exactly the opposite. And the fact that it happens in societies of different cultures and different political structures tells you it's not just country-specific related to their culture. It tells you that it's the paradigm of care itself.
Now here's the strange irony of the approach taken by Kristen Bell. If we are going to treat depression as seriously as we treat any other medically real illness, if we are going to look at antidepressants the same way we look at insulin, let me ask you, why isn't there a similar level of government censorship applied to disinformation and misinformation as spread, as propounded, as popularized by people like Kristen Bell? Why shouldn't the government and medical institutions alike have a similarly muscular policy against disinformation, given that it does ruin lives, given that it ultimately has a body count, and given that the disinformation originates in slogans and marketing campaigns employed by pharmaceutical giants, by the pharmaceutical industry, back in the 1980s and 1990s. But these are notions, these are dangerous pseudoscientific notions that if they weren't debunked already in the 1990s, they certainly have been debunked now.
I'm disgusted. Unsubbed, unfollowed, goodbye.